Hello everyone, it's Joe here from Snake Draft FPL, and today we're talking goalkeeper draft strategy. Those of you that are Patreon members will have seen last week that I basically wrote a thesis on how I draft goalkeepers and why it is better than simply ranking them and picking the next best one available, especially if you are taking them early. And by early, I basically mean pretty much round 7 or earlier, and that includes the premium Alisson, Ederson type keepers. And there will be people that come at me for this, but I can guarantee you by the end of this video you will be semi-convinced at least, and if you're not fully convinced and you read the full article on Patreon, you'll certainly be convinced by the end of that. I will talk about this to basically anyone that listens, so strap in. We're going to get stuck into the goalkeepers today. So, are premium keepers worth drafting early? That is the question here, because what you have to consider is opportunity cost. If you're drafting Alisson in round 1, then everyone here would say, no, you don't want to do that because you could get a proper first round pick and you are missing out on a massive player. Well, let's change it to round 3. Well, people would still say, I don't think so. You're probably going to get a decent midfielder, a starting forward, or a top tier defender in round 3. So you don't want to draft a keeper then. When it gets to round 5, you often hear people say, well, you know, you could pick up a Man City defender. Why not just get Ederson? You know, he's nailed on. He's going to get the same clean sheets that the defenders get, so you might as well go for Ederson. Well, that is not the way to look at it, in my opinion. I think you should be comparing the keepers to other keepers you could draft and when you can get them. Every single person has to draft 2 keepers, so you need to look at when you're drafting them compared to when you could be drafting other keepers and how the points will compare. Now, at the end of the season, you'll look at total points scored by goalkeepers, and it's almost always a real mix. And that is basically because there's an inverse relationship between clean sheets and save and bonus. Basically, the best defenses keep the most clean sheets, the worst defenses get the most save points and most bonus points. So how do you qualify that? Who is the best pick? Well, it's the team that gets a mix of the two, and that's normally a mid-table team that go on a run of clean sheets, like we've seen Villa do it a couple of years ago, Newcastle and Brentford last year, or it's when a premium keeper goes on a mad run of saves, penalty saves, and just has a fantastic season alongside keeping those high number of clean sheets that the premium defenses keep. That kind of stuff is pretty much impossible to predict at the draft. Okay, you might be able to figure it out maybe 10-12 game weeks in if you can kind of find an edge there, but at the draft it's almost impossible to predict who's going to be the highest scoring keeper, who's going to be the lowest scoring keeper. Is even harder because, as you'll see in a minute, you get some really unlikely candidates that come in with some massive hauls in certain games. So I think, even though I make goalkeeper rankings and I put them in my full rankings, I don't think it's wise to rank goalkeepers based on who you think the best keeper is or who you think the best defensive team is. I just don't think that makes any sense. So how else can you do it? Well, I'll get onto that, the actual strategy, in a bit. But first of all, let's take a quick look at the premium keepers, because these are the ones that people are taking round 4, round 5, round 6, when you could be taking like a pretty premium player. So in 22-23, these were the 3 sort of premium options, I would say. Alisson, David De Gea and Ederson. So Alisson got 162 points. He was the highest scoring goalkeeper. David De Gea got 161. Ederson, who was actually the highest average draft position goalkeeper, got only 121 points. I could do a whole nother video on Ederson and how I think he's a pretty terrible goalkeeper pick, but I'll leave that for another day. Best ever seasons by these 3 goalkeepers. Alisson's is 176, which is a fantastic return. De Gea 172, Ederson 169. So you can see these are good tallies. These are like 176. You'll quite often not see a keeper get anywhere near that each season. Generally, the highest scoring keeper is around the 160 mark. And the reason why I think this is important is because if you pick a premium keeper, you're probably going to start them every single week. It's very unlikely that people pick 2 premium keepers and rotate them, because it just doesn't make sense in the draft. And if you do that, it's probably a terrible strategy, by the way. And a lot of people will take the premium keeper and their backup, so they know they've got that keeper every game week of the season, which makes sense to an extent, but I'll get on to why I don't think that's the best option either a bit later on. But you can see here that around 160 points is a great return, and anything sort of above 160 is, we're talking like best keeper in the league kind of standard. Ederson getting 121 points this year, especially as he was often picked in like the 4th or 5th round, is shocking. City were quite unlucky with how many clean sheets they got, but still, that is a disaster for your keeper spot in my opinion. The minimum you want to be looking at really is about 145 points from this slot in your team, and if you pick just one keeper and set and forget them all year, you will be dicing on that line of 145, and I think there's an easy way to go well past that, and I'll show you that on the next slide. So looking at my performance from 22-23 season, I have selected my 3 teams that had 2 goalkeepers each, because a couple of the leagues I did had flexible positions, so I only had 1 keeper in those leagues. But the 3 leagues I participated in where I had just standard FPL draft 2 goalkeepers, these were the returns. So team 1, I picked Pope in round 12 and Ward in round 15, and about halfway through the year I wavered out Ward for Pickford. From that slot I got 167 points, so that's higher than any other keeper in the game, and that was from round 12 and round 15. That was my highest returning goalkeeper slot. Team 2, I drafted Leno in round 14, Henderson in round 15, and then when Henderson got dropped, I wavered him for Navas, sort of mid-year. From these 2, I got 164 points, and that was from the round 14 and round 15, the final 2 rounds in the draft. 164 points. Let me just remind you, Alisson got 162 points, and he was often drafted in the 5th round. Ederson got 121, he was often drafted in the 4th round. So I'm picking up 40 points on Ederson from the last 2 rounds in the draft in that team. And team 3 was Meslier and Sanchez, and then obviously I transferred Sanchez to Steele after that change happened, and from this slot I got 158 points. Now I just want to point out at this stage, this isn't the perfect, what I could have got from the perfect combination. This is what I actually scored in my team. I went through and added it all up week by week. And it certainly wasn't the highest total if I'd picked the right keeper on certain days. I think the team 2, the 164, actually could have been closer to 180 points if I'd picked the right keeper every week, but you're not going to do that, and you're not expected to do that, and you just have to deal with, you will get bench points in this scenario, but that's not really the point. The point is that you're going to get more active points as well. So the crux of what I'm trying to say here is that you cannot really determine how many points a keeper is going to get at the draft season long. It's just, there's too many variables and it's too hard to predict. So what I do is go 100% off fixtures and draft position. I will try and pick keepers that I think are going to be in half decent defences, and keepers that are going to be looking at getting save and bonus points. I also think those keepers aren't often drafted that early. When we're looking at the kind of mid-table teams, they're not often drafted until the 13th, 14th round, which is about, I'd say about round 11, 12 is when I'll start looking at goalkeepers, seeing who's available, see if anyone's likely to get picked soon. If all the premium keepers have gone early, say the big 6 have all gone in the first 6-7 rounds, I'm pretty comfortable that at least 6 out of 10 people in the draft aren't going to pick a keeper until the last round because they've already got a premium, so I can wait a little bit longer. If only 1 or 2 of those keepers have gone, then more people are going to be looking at goalkeepers, and I might have to act a little bit earlier. But generally around 12, you're pretty safe to at least get one of the bigger keepers, but not the premiums. The likes of Pope, Raya, Steele, these kind of mid-table, Martinez, these kind of mid-table goalkeepers are like the ones I'm really trying to target. But the actual strategy, what I'm actually going for, is fixtures. So I have, as you would have seen in my thesis on this on Patreon, if you're a Patreon member, I listed about 29 different rotation pairs that look good for the entire season, and that is what I'll do. I will look at the fixtures and rank them by rotational pairs for the entire season, and I will effectively map out the season and pick the teams that have the best rotation from start to finish. And then what I'll do is every single week I will pick the goalkeeper with the highest likelihood of a clean sheet, and that's it. That's all I do every week. I use bookies odds to determine which team is more likely to keep a clean sheet, and I play that keeper. People talk, they don't like making the decision if there's a rotation or it could be tough. It's very rare that I actually make a decision, because the only time I actually have to decide is if the bookies give them the same odds, which doesn't happen that often. In that scenario, I'll go with the home team. If they're either both home or both away, then I'll just make a decision. But I've found this to be really effective. I've been doing this exact strategy for years, like 8 years or something, and it's never really failed me. I very, very rarely take a premium keeper, and if I do, it's because they're still available when I'm looking to pick a keeper in about the 11th or 12th round. But what you're saving in this is you can lock up the core of your team in the first 8, 9, 10 rounds and not even have to think about goalkeepers. You can build a strong midfield, playing forwards, defenders with good fixtures at the start, and you don't even have to consider it. And then you look to your rotation list and think, okay, which ones am I going for? These have got a good rotation. I'll pick these two in round 12 and 13. Done. Now, there is some strategy to it at the end of the draft, because you need to make sure that if you've got your eye on a certain rotation, you're going to be able to get both keepers, because you don't want to get stuck picking one keeper and then not being able to target the second one that has a good rotation. This is why I try and focus on the rotations that have one keeper that's very unlikely to get drafted. Something like newly promoted keepers is very unlikely people are going to take them any earlier than the last round. So that's how I managed to get Leno and Henderson last year. I picked Henderson right at the start of the final round because I didn't think anyone else was going to go for him. So I've just listed out some of the really strong rotational pairs here. And these are the kind of pairs I'll look to in the draft. I've got Brentford and Fulham, Villa, West Ham, Newcastle, Brentford, Brighton, Bournemouth, West Ham, Fulham, Brighton, Forest, and Forest, Luton. These are all strong pairs. They have good fixtures throughout the entire season. You miss out all the big six. They're not going to be drafted early, realistically. Now, there is a scenario where I will take a premium keeper, and I kind of alluded to it slightly earlier on, and that is if I get to the stage where I'm ready to pick a keeper because I'm happy with the core of my team. It's probably the 11th round at the earliest, maybe the 10th round, if I'm really happy with my team, and that's when I look to draft a keeper. And it might be that there are premium goalkeepers available, and I will still take them over the likes of these teams. But I will not take a premium keeper and their backup. That is, I don't think, worth the 36 out of 38 game weeks where you basically have a wasted slot in your roster. I will still take a keeper that rotates well with the premium keeper, and I will rotate them when the big keepers do play in really tough fixtures. So what I'll look to do is, say I've got Alisson. Not that I've ever drafted Alisson because he always goes really early. I will look to see what teams have good fixtures when Liverpool play City, Arsenal, United, and maybe Chelsea and Spurs, and see who's got good fixtures in those weeks, and then try and target them in the final round. And if I don't get them, it's not the end of the world, because you do have this premium goalkeeper. But that is what I'll try and do. And I've just listed out the best premium support options that are likely to be available in the final round. So if you get Ederson, you're looking at the Burnley keeper, Liverpool, Bournemouth, Arsenal, Sheffield United, United, Burnley, Spurs, Sheffield United, and Chelsea, Bournemouth. So I just think it's not as easy as building a ranking and just picking the next best keeper. You can do that, and you may get lucky with a decent rotation, but that's just not the best way to do it. The best way is to target the fixtures and try and strategically pick 2 keepers that have a good rotation for the entire season that you can sit on for the whole year and not have to worry about them at all. And that is what I do basically every single league, every season. I will try and pick 2 keepers that rotate well and see how many points I can get out of it. You have to accept that you will get bench points at some time because there will be weeks where both teams look like they have a good fixture, but it really isn't as difficult as it seems. And as I said earlier, in that Patreon document, I have picked out about 29 different goalkeeper rotations that are all pretty good. So it's not too stressful in the draft because even though you might have your eye on certain players, there are a lot of different options because generally there's only 6 or 7 fixtures you're trying to avoid for the entire season, so there are a lot of combinations that do work pretty well. That is all I've got for today. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button, subscribe to the channel if you are new. Thank you for watching, and we will see you next time.